Good morning, congregation. Good to see everyone here for the 11 o'clock service of the Valley Church. Amen. Okay, you guys look like you had a good night's sleep and you're awake. We're in the midst of several things here. First of all, if you notice the pile of toys that are accumulating out there, we're in the middle of a toy drive. And we're going to be giving those toys to children that are in hospitals, and it is a great service. And I want you to know that we do that. We like doing that every year. And we're also in the middle of a sermon series that actually we're starting it today, actually. And I'm the first guy, and we've already had the guinea pigs at the 9 o'clock service to be the first ones to hear this. But we are doing Christmas at the movies. Yes, it's a series. And so we're taking each week a particular movie and looking at it. You know, our society is very cynical and doesn't honor God for the most part. But at this time of year, it softens up in some respects. Hollywood can sometimes even get it really close to the gospel message. And in this particular movie that I'm doing today, it's called It's a Wonderful Life. It has a lot of spiritual lessons in it. And so I want us to go through this movie and look at some of the things and see where they actually picked up on some of the messages that Jesus had to say to people. So how many of us have seen It's a Wonderful Life from start to finish? How many have seen it recently so that you could actually tell us right now? Oh, okay, not as many. So when I go through this, you'll basically get the gist of the movie, of course. Now, it was not well accepted when it first came out in 1946. I say that because it just didn't make budget. It didn't break even. And I too, when I first saw it, didn't particularly like it. It really grabbed your heart, that's for sure. But it was kind of it was negative. And but it ended up on a positive. But it's hard to wade through all the bad things that are happening to the main character, and then at the end see what happens. But you have to hang in there if you're going to watch it. So, but it did receive 5 Oscar nominations, believe it or not. Jimmy Stewart for Best Actor and Frank Capra for Best Director, Best Movie. It didn't win any of those. You know, it won for a technical Oscar. They discovered how to make artificial snow. You know, until then it was crunchy snowflake cornflakes that are painted white and didn't really pan out to be very good. So they have an improvement there that they got an Oscar for. All right, so much for that. Let me go over the main characters real quickly here. You have George Bailey. Jimmy Stewart is the star of that, and he portrays this good-hearted guy. He gets interested in his high school sweetheart, Mary Hatch, who becomes Mary Bailey later on in the movie. Donna Reed was that. Now, one of my favorite characters, Mr. Potter. He's an Ebenezer Scrooge type guy. He's the meanest, wealthiest guy in the city that they're in, Bedford Falls, which is a fictitious city, made-up city. And it's supposed to be in the upper state New York. It's supposed to be quaint. But he's the meanest guy around, and he doesn't miss a trick when it comes to finances and things like that. Then there's Harry Bailey, the younger brother of George. And he's quite a character, very honorable man. George actually has the interesting aspect of rescuing him early in the movie. When he was 9 years old, Harry Bailey fell through some ice in a pond, and George Bailey went in after him, fetched him, rescued him, but ended up having a deaf ear because of infection. And so that changed George's life a lot because he couldn't enter the service. He wanted to go into the service during World War II, and he didn't get to do that. But Harry did. And then you have Uncle Billy, who's a little bit of a doofus. He's partnered with Peter Bailey, the father of George, in a home loans credit union type of business. And he's just not really efficient, but he's lovable. And then you have a police officer and a cab driver named Bert and Ernie. Yes, that's where it came from, guys. Sesame Street took that, from there. And finally, one of the more lovable characters is Clarence. Clarence Oddbody AS2. That means Angel Second Class. He just didn't have his wings, and he needed to earn them. And so he's the guardian angel to George Bailey. And so in the movie, he gets sent down to help George, because in the movie, George has some really major problems. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But George also did one other act of kindness that I thought was pretty noteworthy. Early in the movie, he stops Mr. Gower, the pharmacist, from giving the wrong prescription to a customer. It actually was poison. That Mr. Gower was distressed. His son had died. He wasn't paying attention, and he was going to poison the client. And so George helped him with that, stopped that. So that's kind of neat to know. It comes into play in the movie. Well, okay. What I really wanted to do when I started looking at this movie was just play the movie and shut up and let you guys just watch it all the way from start to finish. I won't do that. It would be worth doing that, but it's important just to kind of concentrate on a few things here. So I'm going to set you up with this next video. It's about George and Mary. George goes to a dance, a high school dance. Mary's there, and he falls in love with her. They're doing a dance contest. Maybe those of you who've seen the movie know that Charleston, back in those days, and they had a Charleston contest, and George and Mary are dancing on the floor, and a jealous rival hits a button, and the floor opens up, and there's a pool underneath the gymnasium floor. Believe it or not, that was an actual high school gymnasium. Beverly Hills High School in 1946. They call it the Swimnasium. And but George and Mary are dancing, and they don't know it's opened up, and they're dancing up to the edge with their backs towards it, and the crowd is yelling at them. They thinking they're being cheered on and they're winning the contest. And eventually they do fall in, and then everyone jumps in afterwards. So it's a great scene, a great comic scene. And what we're going to look here is we're going to look at George and Mary coming home from that event. They had to borrow clothes, and because they were soaking wet. And what I want you to note is that George is a dreamer. I want you to feel that, because I'm a dreamer too. And so he speaks to me in a lot of respects. So watch this. And also pay attention to the house that they stop off at, called the Graydon House. That comes into play a little later on. Okay.
Buffalo girls, can't you come out tonight? Can't you come out tonight? Can't you come out tonight? Buffalo girls, can't you come out tonight? And dance by the light of the moon.
Oh, hot dog, just like an organ.
Beautiful.
I told Harry I thought I'd be bored to death. You should have seen the commotion in that locker room. I had to knock down 3 people to get this stuff we're wearing here. Let me hold that old wet dress of yours.
Do I look as funny as you do?
I guess I'm not quite the football type. You look wonderful. You know, if it wasn't me talking, I'd say you were the prettiest girl in town.
Well, why don't you say it?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I will say it. How old are you anyway?
18.
18? Well, it was only last year you were 17.
You're too young or too old?
Oh, no. Just right. Your age fits you. Yes, sir. You look a little older without your clothes on. I mean, without a dress, you look older. I mean, younger. You just... Uh-oh. On the thing here.
Sir, by train, please.
A pox upon me for a clumsy lout. Your caboose, milady.
You may kiss my hand.
Hey, Mary.
As I was lumbering down the street, down the street, down the street.
Okay, then I'll throw a rock at the old Granville house.
Oh, no, don't. I love that old house.
No, you see, you make a wish and then try and break some glass in. You got to be a pretty good shot nowadays, too.
Oh,
Now,
no,
what?
George, don't. It's full of romance, that old place. I'd like to live in it.
In that place?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't live in as a ghost. Now, watch. There's right in the second floor there, see?
What'd you wish, George?
Well, not just one wish, a whole hatful. Mary, I know what I'm going to do tomorrow and the next day and next year and a year after that. I'm shaking the dust of this crummy little town off my feet, and I'm going to see the world. Italy, Greece, the Parthenon, the Colosseum. Then I'm coming back here and go to college to see what they know, and then I'm going to build things. I'm going to build airfields. I'm going to build skyscrapers 100 stories high. I'm going to build bridges a mile long. Were you going to throw a rock? Hey, that's pretty good. What'd you wish, Mary?
Buffalo gals, can't you come out tonight? Can't you come out tonight? Can't you come out tonight? Buffalo gals, can't you come out tonight?
Dance by the light of the moon. What'd you wish when you threw that rock?
Oh, no.
Come on,
no.
tell me.
If I told you, it might not come true.
What is it you want, Mary? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down. Hey, that's a pretty good idea. I'll give you the moon, Mary.
I'll take it. Then what?
Well, then you could swallow it. And it'd all dissolve, see? And the moonbeams would shoot out of your fingers and your toes and the ends of your hair. Am I talking too much?
Yes. Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death?
How's that?
Why don't you kiss her instead of talking her to death?
Want me to kiss her, huh?
They did not kiss. They had dating guidelines. And, but the point I'm making here is that George is a man with tons of dreams, and it appeals to you in many ways. But there is a lesson that I want us, there's 3 lessons that I want us to take away from this picture and see where, where Frank Capra really borrowed from what is in the Bible, some very important truths. Okay, lesson number 1, it's not about you. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, it says this. And these are the words of Jesus when he goes and says, just as the Son of Man, that's his title for himself, did not come to be served, but to serve. I didn't come to be served. I came to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. In Christianity, you think that it's all about Jesus. He's the center of it all. And indeed he is. But that's not his vision of himself. He came with us in mind. He came saying, it's not about me, it's about you. I am going to the cross for you. And so he lived his life with the thought that he's supposed to be a servant, not the center of attention. And we see this in George a little later in the movie. I want to set up the next video, which is Peter Bailey. Peter Bailey dies. That's not what the video's about. And so there's a board meeting of the Savings and Loan, and George will be there along with Uncle Billy. And what I want you to note is the times in which George gives up his dreams for others, okay? Take note of that, and we'll talk a little bit about it afterwards.
Need you for, George. I know you're anxious to make a train.
I have a taxi waiting downstairs.
I want the board to know that George gave up his trip to Europe to help straighten things out here these past few months. Good luck to you at school, George.
Good luck, George. Good luck.
Now we come to the real purpose of this meeting, to appoint a successor to our dear friend, Peter Bailey.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to get to my real purpose.
Wait just a minute now.
Wait for what? I claim this institution is not necessary to this town. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to dissolve this institution and turn its assets and liabilities over to the receiver.
What are you dirty contemporary? I'll read this next one. George, did you hear what that was?
It's too soon after Peter Bailey's death to talk about chloroforming the building and loan.
Peter Bailey died 3 months ago. I second Mr. Potter's motion.
Very well. In that case, I'll ask the 2 executive officers to withdraw. But before you go, I'm sure the whole board wishes to express its deep sorrow at the passing of Peter Bailey.
Thank you.
It was his faith and devotion that are responsible for this organization.
I'll go further than that. I'll say that to the public, Peter Bailey was the building and loan.
Oh, that's fine, Potter, coming from you, considering that you probably drove him to his grave.
Peter Bailey was not a businessman. That's what killed him. Oh, I don't mean any disrespect to him, God rest his soul. He was a man of high ideals, so-called. But ideals without common sense can ruin this town. Now, you take this loan here to Ernie Bishop. You know, that fellow that sits around all day on his brains in his taxi, you know. I happen to know the bank turned down this loan, but he comes here, and we're building him a house worth $5,000. Why?
Well, I handled that, Mr. Potter. You have all the papers there, his salary, insurance. I can personally vouch for his character.
Friend of yours?
Yes, sir.
You see, if you shoot pool with some employee here, you can come and borrow money. What does that get us? A discontented, lazy rabble instead of a thrifty working class. And all because a few starry-eyed dreamers like Peter Bailey stir 'em up and fill their head with a lot of impossible ideas. Now, I say...
Just a minute. Just a minute. Now, hold on, Mr. Potter. Just a minute. Now, you're right when you say my father was no businessman. I know that. Why he ever started this cheap penny-ante building and loan, I'll never know. But neither you nor anybody else can say anything against his character because his whole life was... Why, in the 25 years since he and Uncle Billy started this thing, he never once thought of himself. Isn't that right, Uncle Billy? He didn't save enough money to send Harry to school, let alone me. But he did help a few people get out of your slums, Mr. Potter. And what's wrong with that? Well, here, you're all businessmen here. Doesn't it make them better citizens? Doesn't it make them better customers? You said that what'd you say just a minute ago? They had to wait and save their money before they even thought of a decent home? Wait for what? Until their children grow up and leave them? Until they're so old and broken down that do you know how long it takes a working man to save $5,000? Just remember this, Mr. Potter, that this rabble you're talking about, they do most of the working and paying and living and dying in this community. Well, is it too much to have them work and pay and live and die in a couple of decent rooms and a bath? Anyway, my father didn't think so. People were human beings to him, but to you, a warped, frustrated old man, they're cattle. Well, in my book, he died a much richer man than you'll ever be.
I'm not interested in your book. I'm talking about the building and loan.
I know very well what you're talking about. You're talking about something you can't get your fingers on, and it's galling you. That's what you're talking about, I know. Well, I've said too much. You're the board here. You do what you want with this thing. There's just one thing more, though. This town needs this measly one-horse institution, if only to have some place where people can come without crawling to Potter. Come on.
I like that. I like that. It's a good part of the movie, and it happens again a little later on where Peter balls out Mr. Potter. But notice here, the very beginning of the video, George gave up his travel dreams. You know, he was going to go all over the world, but because his dad died, he took over the business. And now he just balled out Potter. What's going to happen is the board's going to ask for him to be the CEO of the building and loan corporation. And he will accept it reluctantly because they'll turn it over to Potter otherwise. And so he gave up his school dreams with that. So it has pretty big impact in the movie. And the director, you know, Frank Capra, was trying to show you that it's not about you by holding up what George Bailey is doing. Which leads us to the second lesson. Character of heart is more important than the cash you have. In 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, it says this. This is Samuel looking at the sons of David, and he's very impressed with the older ones, you know, Eliab and Abinadab and Shammah. They're strapping, powerful-looking young men. But God keeps on telling them they're not going to be king of Israel. It's going to be the runt of the litter, David, at the bottom there, the number 8. But look what it says. The Lord said to Samuel, this is in verse 7 of 1 Samuel 16, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I rejected him. The Lord does not look at things people look at. People look at outward appearances, but the Lord looks at the heart. Heart is far more important, far more important. And Hollywood, you know, appearance is a big deal in Hollywood, but in this episode here, we're getting a flavor that that's not the most important thing. It's not at all. Now, I'm going to set up the next video here. Again, this is going to be an example of character being greater than cash. What you're going to see is this. It takes place right after the wedding of George and Mary. They fall in love, they get married, it's a great scene. They hop into the taxi cab, Ernie's driving, and they're talking about their honeymoon, and George hands $2,000 to Mary. He says, this is going to be spent on anything you want. I'm excited that we're going to go and enjoy ourselves for the first time here. And so they're driving to get out of town after their wedding, and lo and behold, as they drive down Main Street, there's a bank run. This is 1932. This is the fall. This is the fall, the stock market fall, and there's a bank run, and there's Mr. Potter's bank over here. There's the savings and loans over here, and both of them have crowds of people entering them, panicking. And so, take note of that, and we'll go into another clip right after that, which the Graydon house comes into play. George and Mary. Well, you'll see. Let's start. Well, let me say this. They were intending to go on their honeymoon. Keep that in mind. And they really don't have a place to stay the home yet. But you'll get to see what happens. The Graydon house comes into play here. Okay? So let's see those two videos together.
Now, just remember that this thing isn't as black as it appeared. I have some news for you, folks. I was just talking to old man Potter, and he's guaranteed cash payments to the bank. The bank's going to reopen next week.
But, George, I got my money here.
Did he guarantee this place?
Well, no, Charlie, I didn't even ask him. We don't need Potter over here.
And I'll take mine now.
No, but you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Well, your money's in Joe's house. That's right next to yours. And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others. You're lending them the money to build, and then they're going to pay it back to you as best they can. Now, what are you going to do, foreclose on them?
I got $242 in here, and $242 isn't going to break anybody.
Okay, Tom. All right. Here you are. You sign this. You get your money in 60 days.
60 days?
Well, now, that's what you agreed to when you bought your shares.
Tom, did you get your money?
No.
Well, I did. Old man Potter will pay 50 cents on the dollar for every share you got.
50 cents on the dollar?
Yes, cash.
Well, what do you say?
No, Tom, you have to stick to your original agreement. Now, give us 60 days on this
Okay,
thing.
Randall.
Are you going to Potter's?
Better to get half than nothing.
That's what I need.
Tom! Randall, wait a minute. Now, wait. Now, listen to me. I beg of you not to do this thing. If Potter gets a hold of this building and loan, there'll never be another decent house built in this town. He's already got charge of the bank, he's got the bus line, he's got the department stores, and now he's after us. Why? Well, it's very simple. Because we're cutting in on his business, that's why. And because he wants to keep you living in his slums and paying the kind of rent he decides. Joe, you had one of those Potter houses, didn't you? Well, have you forgotten? Have you forgotten what he charged you for that broken-down shack? Here, Ed, you remember last year when things weren't going so well and you couldn't make your payments? Well, you didn't lose your house, did you? You think Potter would have let you keep it? Can't you understand what's happening here? Don't you see what's happening? Potter isn't selling, Potter's buying. And why? Because we're panicky and he's not, that's why. He's picking up some bargain. Now, we can get through this thing all right. We've got to stick together, though. We've got to have faith in each other.
But my husband hasn't worked in over a year, and I need money.
How am I going to live until the bank opens?
I got doctor bills to pay.
I need cash.
I can't keep my kids on faith. I've got to have...
How much do you need?
Hey! I got $2,000. Here's $2,000. This will tide us over to the bank reopens. All right, Tom, how much do you need?
$242.
No, Tom, just enough to tide you over until the bank reopens.
I'll take $242.
There you are.
That'll close my account.
Your account's still here. That's a loan. Okay. All right, Ed.
Well, I got $300 here, George.
All right, now, Ed, what'll it take until the bank opens? What do you need?
Well, I suppose $20?
$20. Now you're talking. Thanks, Ed. That's fine. All right, now, Miss Thompson, how much do you want?
But it's your own money,
Now,
George.
never mind about that. How much do you want now?
I can get along with 20, all right.
$20. Fine.
And I'll sign the
Yeah, yeah.
paper.
You don't have to sign anything. I know you. You pay when you can. That's okay. All right, Miss Davis.
Could I have $17.50?
That's your heart. Of course you can have it. You got to...
Okay. So it's at the end of the day after the run, all 2,000, well, actually $2 were left over. That's all the bank had. They put it in the safe. He gets a call saying, come home, Mr. Bailey, and you're going to see the home. Go ahead.
All right. Hurry up. I'm hurrying.
It's the Granville house.
Hi, good evening, sir. Entree, monsieur. Entree.
Okay, that's enough, Sergio. Okay, obviously, he gave up some more dreams for people. It's not too long after that we have a great scene. I'm not going to show, but I'll just simply say this, that Potter says to George Bailey, invites him over to his office and says to him that he wants to hire him, and that he will pay him $20,000, which is equivalent to $250,000 today, $20,000 a year to be his manager. And George Bailey at first is tempted and enticed to do that because that's a big offer, but then in the end he realizes what's happening and he balls him out. So you have the second appearance of an angry George Bailey. So that leads us to lesson number 3. You don't know the impact your life has. You just don't know. I'm going to read 2 passages. Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Moths and vermin do not destroy, and thieves do not break in. For where your treasure is, your heart will be also. You know, your impact starts with what you sow. You know, and Jesus is saying you need to invest in something besides material blessings. You need to invest in people. You need to invest, that's what this church is all about. If you're visiting here for the first time, I really want you to feel like you're in family because we care about God and we care about you, and we want to make an investment in every single life possible. Each of us have been invested in. And in Mark chapter 4, this is the second passage I want to read, starting in verse 20, it says, others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word and accept it and produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times that what was sown. You know, your impact is related to the sowing and the reaping. You reap what you sow. And in Mark 4, it talks about how if you invest spiritually into people's lives, the produce will be as much as 100 times what was sown, because they go ahead and do the same thing and help others. So we're talking about a process here that's how this church started and how it's been growing. And so you just don't know. You just don't know what this is going to lead to and what your life will lead to here. I've been here in this church, my wife and I, for 30 years. And I remember when it was only 50 people. And I look now, and it's over, the whole church is 6,000. So you got to say something about sowing and reaping here. And you don't measure the impact of your life just by what you can see and what you can take home. It's a long process. And so what I want to do is set up video number 5 here. And what has happened is this. George Bailey sent Uncle Billy out to make a deposit at Potter's Bank. This is a few years in the future here. George and Mary have four kids, and they live in the Granville house. It looks a little bit better than it did there. Uncle Billy makes a mistake, and he accidentally drops the envelope with the $8,000 that he's supposed to be depositing into the lap of Mr. Potter. He doesn't know it. He walks off thinking that he made the deposit, but he did not. And when he discovers that the money's missing, he realizes he's in trouble. In fact, the bank examiner is over at the building and loan doing the accounting, and if there's a discrepancy that large, it's serious. It's a penalty, civil penalty, jail time, whatever. It gets pretty bad. And so that scene, you got Uncle Billy going crazy. You got George Bailey discovering the mistake, and he gets desperate, and he goes to Potter to ask for a loan. One of the critics of this movie said, I don't like Mr. Potter. He gets away with stealing $8,000. And that's true. You don't see whatever happens to him, except the results at the end. You'll sense it. But Potter asked him, well, do you have any collateral? If I'm going to give you a loan for $8,000, you have collateral. He had a life insurance policy, and he looked at it and he says, George, you're worth more dead than alive. He says, I'm going to do you a favor. This is Potter speaking to George. It's kind of a sad scene. He says, I'm going to call the bank examiner. I'm going to have him arrest you right now for malfeasance. And so George is despondent. He goes home. He treats the family badly. He gets angry. He yells at the kids, snaps at them. And Mary says something, and he realizes he's been misbehaving. And he runs outside into the cold winter. It's Christmas Eve. And he goes to the bridge, and he's going to jump off and kill himself. And that's where Clarence comes in. Because Clarence is standing in back of him. He doesn't realize it. Clarence, the guardian angel that has been sent to help him out. And Clarence jumps into the water ahead of him, and so he has to save Clarence, thinking that it's a person drowning. And yeah, George is helping out. Clarence is screaming, help me, help me, help me. It's kind of a funny scene. And then he realizes, once he gets him ashore, that Clarence is not the ordinary guy. He says, I'm a guardian angel. I've been sent here. I'm going to get my wings if I help you out. George doesn't believe that at first. And George says, I wish I'd never been born. And Clarence says, I can have that arranged as an angel. He can have it arranged. And he does that. And so George, just kind of like Ebenezer Scrooge sees the three ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future, he kind of goes through something like that where he sees what his life would be like, what life would be like without him if he's never been born. And we're going to see that scene. So happens that Bedford Falls, that quaint little village that they live in, is no longer Bedford Falls. If George wasn't born, it becomes Pottersville. And it's not quaint. It's full of honky-tonk, clubs, it's 1946, clubs and all sorts of risque type businesses and stuff like that. So it's definitely not what it was, and he gets to see that. And this scene takes place where he's going to try to meet up with some of his friends in the development that he created. And instead of houses being there, it's going to be a graveyard. So we'll see that. Go ahead.
Are you sure this is Bailey Park?
No, I'm not sure of anything anymore. All I know is this should be Bailey Park. But where are the houses?
We weren't here to build them. Your brother, Harry Bailey, broke through the ice and was drowned at the age of 9.
That's a lie. Harry Bailey went to war. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He saved the lives of every man on that transport.
Every man on that transport died. Harry wasn't there to save them because you weren't there to save Harry. You see, George, you really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be to throw it away?
Clarence,
Yes, George?
where's Mary?
Oh, well, I can't.
I don't know how you know these things, but tell me, where is she? If you know where she is, tell me where my wife is.
I'm not supposed to tell.
Please, Clarence, tell me where she is.
You're not going to like it, George.
Where is she?
She's an old maid. She never married.
Where's Mary? Where is she? Where is she?
She's just about to close up the library. Oh, there must be some easier way for me to get my wings.
Okay. And so what happens, of course, he gets to see Mary, who doesn't recognize him, and things like that. So in the end, he goes back to the bridge, and he's crying to God, and he says, please help me, Lord. I want my life back to the way it was. And the final scene is what I call the final restoration. It's things go back, and George realizes it, and he goes back running up Main Street. So we'll get to see that. I want you to enjoy the final restoration of George Bailey.
Yay! Hello, Bedford Falls! Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas, George! Merry Christmas, George! Merry Christmas, movie house! Merry Christmas, Emporium! Merry Christmas, you wonderful old Billy and Lone! Happy New Year to you! In jail! Go on home, they're waiting for you. Mary! 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 Well, hello, Mr. Bank Examiner. How? Mr. Bailey, there's a deficit. I know, $8,000.
George, I've got a little paper.
I'll bet it's a warrant for my arrest. Isn't it wonderful? I'm going to jail. Merry Christmas, reporters. Where's Mary? Mary! Oh, look at this wonderful old drafty house. Mary! 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 Have you seen my wife? Mary!
Daddy!
Kids! Hey! Oh. Kids! Janie told me. Look at you. Oh, I could eat you up. Where's your mother?
She went looking for you.
With Uncle Billy. Daddy!
Zuzu, my little ginger snap. How do you feel?
Fine. Not a smidge of temper.
Not a smidge of... Hallelujah.
Hello. George! George, darling, where are you? George, darling, where are you? Oh, George, George.
Let me touch you. Are you real? Oh,
George.
Well, you have no idea what's happened to me.
I have no idea what happened. Well, come on, George. Come on downstairs. Quick, they're on their way.
All right.
Come on. Come on in here now. Now you stand right over here by the tree. Right there. And don't move. Don't move. What's happening? Wow. I hear them coming now. George, it's a miracle. It's a miracle.
What's happening? Who's gonna come, Daddy? Who, Daddy?
Come in, Uncle Billy. Everybody in here.
George!
George!
Isn't it wonderful? So many friends. Mary did it, George. Mary did it. She told some people you were in trouble with it. They scattered all over town collecting money. Didn't ask any questions, just said, George in trouble. Tell me.
What is this?
Another
run on stage?
Here, George. Merry Christmas. Now, don't push. There we are. The line farms on the right. Merry Christmas. Come in, George. Now, don't Merry Christmas. Don't push out this. Oh, Mr. Martini. Here's Martini. Step right up there. You all get up. I busted the jukebox, too. Major Ransom was charged with now.
just a minute. Quiet, everybody. Quiet, quiet. Now get this. It's from London.
Oh.
Mr. Gower cabled you need cash. Stop. My office instructed to advance you up to $25,000. Stop. Hee-haw and Merry Christmas, Sam Wainwright.
Mr. Martini, how about some wine?
The fool flew all the way up here in a blizzard.
Harry, how about your banquet in New York?
Oh, I left right in the middle of it. As soon as I got Mary's telegram. Good idea, Ernie. A toast. To my big brother, George, the richest man in town.
I blubbered in the first one, too. Guys, in the middle of that pile of money, Clarence, the angel, was reading. He left a book. He was reading it. It was Tom Sawyer, and he autographed it. So when George looks at it, he opens it up and it says to him, George, thank you for the wings. And he says, no man's a failure who has friends. And sorry, you guys are what those people were to George. You guys are that here. You love me. I know my wife and I feel loved up on, and we feel rich, not because of money. In fact, a lot of my dreams haven't come true, but one thing is I don't feel like a failure because of my dearest, dearest friends. And if you're visiting here, and I know you're just kind of watching a guy cry in front of you, but we're family. We're that close, guys. You're missing out if you're not part of this great body of loving people. I know we're not perfect. We're not perfect at all, but we have something that's a diamond. We have the wonderful life. So, with those thoughts, it's all possible because Jesus Christ died for us. He went to the cross because he didn't come with the thought it's all about him. I mean, he lived in heaven at the lap of luxury with God. I mean, and he basically got a demotion and became a person and lived his life sinlessly, and he died on that cross because we needed someone to pay the price that we couldn't pay. And so we're going to look at the emblems of that sacrifice, the body of Jesus Christ memorialized in bread, and the blood of Jesus Christ memorialized in the fruit of the vine. And so let's bow our heads and let's be thankful for the wonderful life that has been given to us. We don't deserve it for a second, but you know what? I'm so, so thankful. Father, thank you for letting us have this time looking at a production that was made almost 100 years ago, but that understood at least some of the things you hold dear. And it was an example of how Christianity can be supported in our culture at times. And I pray, Lord, that as we're sitting here, we'll be contemplating what it means to have a wonderful life. I thank you for the thoughts that it's not about us. Thank you that you value the character of our hearts more than any material thing. I thank you that we're promised to be impacting, and we don't know the extent of that impact, even after living a long life and looking back on it. because it can go beyond us. You allow this to happen. You made it happen. And for that, we say thank you. May we appreciate this emblems of your sacrifice and get close to you. In Jesus' name, amen.